All right, Doug Lamorie's back with Stephen Means. I know Stephen's already texted about this morning. I'm going to send some texts out. If you want to be a tech subscriber, you get info, research we do for the pod, things we learn along the way. Maybe it's mentioned here, maybe it's not, but it's a little bonus in your pocket. 614-350-3315. If you want to be a tech subscriber there, you get a 2-week free trial. Stephen, I just double-checked again. We've done these numbers many times before. The number of Ohio recruits in Ohio State's classes. So we all see the trend. So I went back to 2010, which was the last full Jim Tressel class before stuff got sideways, because that 2011 class, Jim Tressel laid the groundwork. There was like a kid or two who dropped out once Jim Tressel was forced to resign. Luke Fickell kind of pieced it back together. And then the 2012 class has a lot of Luke Fickell and Urban Meyer dropping some guys in on top right when he got hired. And then 2013 is all Urban Meyer. So here's Ohio kids. Starting in 2010, 10 of 18. 2011, 13 of 22. 2012, 16 of 25. That is the Fickell class with the little Urban on top. 2013, 10 of 23. Now here comes Urban. Now this is the Urban stuff. 2014, 9 of 23. 2015, 12 of 26. 2016, 9 of 24. 2017, and here we go. 6 of 21. 2018, 5 of 26, 2019, 5 of 17, 2020, 8 of 25, 2021, 6 of 24, 2022, 6 of 21, 2023, 7 of 20, Stephen. So we went from a world where between 2010 and 2015, Ohio State had double-digit Ohio kids, 5 out of 6 classes, and the other class they had 9, to a world where they have not had double-digit Ohio kids in a class since 2016. And now it's like not quite halved, but it's 60% maybe of what it once was, right? In 2011, they had 13. In 2022 and 23 combined, they had 13. Mark Pantoni spent a lot of time last Wednesday talking about we're going to recruit Ohio first. That's our priority. And certainly implying that they're going to recruit Ohio harder, more aggressively, and I read it as bringing in more Ohio kids. First of all, do you think that will actually happen in this NIL world?
I do. Partially because of NIL, but partially because Ohio's gotten an uptick again in talent, especially in this 24 class, where there's 9 guys, I believe 7 guys, I believe, in the top 200, and then another 3 guys in the top 300. There's enough guys that where if this kid lived in Georgia, Ohio State would still be recruiting them, right? It's not just because they're from Ohio. Ohio State's going to recruit them. So it's the caliber of player that's now in your backyard that maybe wasn't in your backyard in 2017 at the same caliber of level in comparison to, like, I don't know, go get Chase Young, go get Jeff Okudah, go get those types of guys, go get J.K. Dobbins. But then also NIL has, as we talked about to begin with, when we're talking about the kids who probably have NIL first on their mind, we're talking about national kids. We're talking about kids who live in the SEC, kids who live out west, kids who live in the Southwest. That's less likely to consistently be a case with Midwest kids right now, at least from their standpoint. We'll see if that begins to change, but that's less of a problem right now. But then also those kids are, if you're from Ohio, you're probably less likely to demand to see playing time right away. You're okay with it. And Mark Pantoni even said this. They're okay with the development, even if it takes a couple of years to get on the field. You think about a guy like Reed Carrico, former top 100 recruit. If that kid was from Georgia with that exact same athletic profile, he probably is not still on this roster, because top 100 recruit is not trying to potentially have to wait 4 years before he gets on the field. But because he's from Ohio, he probably is a little more patient to get on the field and wait his turn a little bit more. So it's all those things combined. NIL probably just gave it the push that it probably needed at this point, because Ryan Day was always going to have to live in a world that was probably in the middle of where Tressel was in that extreme versus the extreme that Urban Meyer was. NIL probably just gave him that push to be a little bit more like that.
So I like this idea. I feel like I have been espousing this idea for a long time of like fill in your roster, fill in the middle and bottom of your roster with kids who grew up wanting to be Buckeyes. And I think that's a good thing. It also can be a very dangerous dance because you know who's really good? Chase Young. You know who's really good? Emeka Ibuka.
Yeah.
You know who's really good? CJ Stroud. Those guys aren't from Ohio. So you can't stop there. But I do think more of an Ohio heart to the roster is not a bad thing. And the thing that Mark Pantoni said, and I thought you had a very interesting exchange with Mark Pantoni about this. I find the whole idea fascinating. The idea of over-evaluation, and that players who are closer to Ohio State's campus and therefore can get to more camps and perhaps, and you asked this directly, get to camps earlier, actually maybe are hurt by that process. And it to me, it reminds me a lot of the NFL and NBA drafts where it feels like sometimes you're better off going and leaving college while the pros still have some questions about you rather than giving them one more year of film for them to nitpick everything you aren't great at. You know, and my example would always like James Laurinaitis fell to early in the second round because he played 4 years of college football. And I felt like by the end, people were like, well, I don't know about that. And it's like, you know what? Just go and get out of here. And and then they only focus on the good. Over evaluation, Stephen, fascinating to me. And Mark Pantoni's awareness of it and trying to make sure in the future they don't do it, just as fascinating. What do you think about this entire idea? Because you and Mark were talking about it.
Yeah, I think it's a very astute point that maybe we didn't think about, because you always think about, oh, Jack Sawyer's from Columbus and he committed so early. Now he's here all the time. You don't have to worry about him going all over the place because he's 15 minutes away from everything he could possibly need. Sonny Styles the exact same way. CJ Hicks, even though it's maybe an hour longer because he's from Dayton, but the same concept. Paris Johnson, same concept. You don't think, but that's for 5-star recruits. That's where it benefits Ohio State. You think about a guy like a Jermaine Matthews, right, who wasn't necessarily the type of recruit he is when he's actually getting here, top 50 recruit. And so maybe the first time he shows up here, the exact quote that Mark Pantoni used, I'll start with that. My biggest worry for Ohio is that they come here at the end of their sophomore year, going into their junior year, so they're still 15 years old. Their bodies haven't developed. Say they run a bad 40 time. Well, that 40 time may always be placed on that kid's head for no fault of their own. They were just young, underdeveloped, and not strong enough yet, where you wish you could have had them after their junior year. Now, will they be patient enough to come, or is it going to be too late in the process? The too late in the process thing hasn't happened yet, despite, but the patient aspect of it has happened at times where kids do get frustrated. Jermaine Matthews was frustrated that he didn't get an offer yet, and that's why he had announced last summer, I'm not camping anywhere. These are my offers. I've got Cincinnati. I've got some low-level Power Fives. I'm sticking with that. I'm tired of waiting on Ohio State. And so Tim Walton had to convince him to do that stuff. There's plenty of Jermaine Matthews stories, even in this 2024 class. Another example of that is probably like a Luke Hamilton or, pretty much any offensive lineman at this point, because you see them so much, but you don't necessarily see them when they're at the peak of their abilities as a high school. You always remember if a wide receiver ran a 4.6 or a 4.7 when they were 15, that's your base. It's almost like your first impression always sticks with you. While you take a kid like a Brandon Ennis, he only came to Ohio once to camp, and that was, he came as a sophomore too, but he was already on the 5-star level, and so you get a different first impression of him than you would maybe of a Jaden Ballard. So there's this fine line with the way Ohio State's had to recruit Ohio. You get the Luke Montgomerys, the CJ Hickses, the Jack Sawyers, the Paris Johnsons, who you lock in early, and then you maybe come around to some other Ohio guys, but because that means you're probably over-evaluating them. And as you over-evaluating them, sometimes they do turn into the top 50 recruit. But sometimes they maybe stick at maybe 122 or 177, and they get so sick of waiting on you that, you know what, I'm going to go to Michigan, or I'm going to go to Penn State, or I'm going to go here, I'm going to go there. And so that's when you lose some of those kids. Now, sometimes it's kids they wouldn't take anyway, but when it is a kid you take, those start to pile up, and they can come back to bite you in the butt.
So I will say the way Ohio State goes after players affects how I view them when they get here. And it is the continuing discussion of doing things from strength versus weakness. So I'm going to use an example here that wound up working out for Ohio State, but not by their plan. So in the 2020 recruiting class, they went after Bijan Robinson as the number one running back in the country, and they went hard after him, and they thought they were going to get him, and they didn't. And okay, stuff happens. But they also went after Jalen Knighton, who was a Florida kid who was ranked as the number 106 overall player and the number 10 running back in that class. And I think they thought they were going to get him. And for a while, I think they thought they were going to get both, and then at least they thought they were going to get one. So they didn't get Knighton, and now all of a sudden they're down to plan C in that room. And they wound up coming all the way down to a guy named Mayan Williams, who was ranked as the number 45 running back and number 627 overall player in that class. So Knighton's 106, Mayan Williams is 627. So they have to flip Mayan Williams from Iowa State to get him to come to Ohio State at that point. And we've now covered this. Tony Alford has talked about this. Mayan Williams is kind of, I think, a little bit ticked off about it. It's like, why did this take so long? But in the end, it worked out for Ohio State. Jalen Knighton in 3 years at Miami ran for like 1,000 yards total in 3 years, and now after this season transferred to SMU. So Jalen Knighton saying no to Ohio State back then probably led Ohio State to a better place, that they wound up with Mayan Williams instead of Jalen Knighton. But guess what Tony Alford did in that recruiting cycle? Spent a lot of time trying to recruit Bijan Robinson and Jalen Knighton. And Mayan Williams at the end easily could have told them, see ya, Matt Campbell loves me. I'm going to go be the next Breece Hall. I'm not coming to the heck. Get out of here, Ohio State. They got lucky. But if you are saying, so then when Mayan Williams comes here and I'm like, I don't know. Mayan Williams, he's ranked in the 600s. They went to him only after they missed on their first options, multiple first options. And then I'm like, if they didn't, it wasn't their plan to get this guy. Why would anyone be excited about this? So if you're telling me, Stephen, the new plan is the Jalen Knight, listen, still go after Bijan. Bijan's a difference maker. Still go after Bijan. But don't mess with the Jalen Knightons of the world. With like a kid who's ranked around 100 in Florida. I'm not saying you went to Miami, but like in that, go get Mayan Williams. And now Mark Pantoni is saying maybe we have to be willing to develop guys more once they get here. That Mark Pantoni is saying, hey, maybe this player right now, he's not as good. He knows it. We know it. He's not as good. Mayan Williams right now is not as good as Jalen Knighton. But if we get him here, he wants to be here. He's not going to leave. And we believe in his work ethic and we believe in our development skills. We will develop him in the end into a better player than what that other guy would be, or at least as good. And we're not going to waste time trying to chase this guy who in the end very likely isn't going to come here. That's an example to me, Stephen, where in 2020, they kind of lucked into that because the players said no. Maybe they need to be more first thought with that of, hey, we talked to Jalen Knighton. It didn't. And I'm not saying anything against Jalen Knighton. It's just an example. We talked to a Jalen Knighton type player, a guy ranked around 100 who's a national recruit. It just doesn't feel like let's go get this guy before Iowa State gets his commitment and get all in on him and start that developmental process. That's one of the ways I'm thinking about this. But never stop trying for Bijans, because they can't stop trying for Bijans. But go from Bijan to Mayan, skip the Jalen Knighton step. That, to me, is an example in my head of how I think this could look in the future for Ohio State and still be a way for this team to win and bring in players who will have successful, helpful careers here.
I think that's a perfect example right there, because Mayan Williams could have said no. He could have been frustrated with Ohio State. And because the way you just pointed that out, we even said it at the time. Mayan Williams is like plan D here, guys, because they didn't get Bijan. They thought they had Bijan, and then he changed his mind last minute and decided to go with Texas. They thought they had Jalen Knighton. They thought they had Kendall Milton. That's just the three people. He's playing like D, E, or F. If we can see that, that kid can see it too. And nobody wants to feel like they're option number 4 or 5. Everybody wants to feel like they were option 1, even if they know they're option 2. So, and with these Ohio kids, they get frustrated. And you know who can take advantage? In that situation, Iowa State took advantage of it. But you know who can actually take advantage of it? Michigan. And then they can use that, hey, we hate Ohio State too. Come here and then beat them. Come to Ohio, come over to Michigan and beat them. Penn State can use that as a recruiting tool against you now. And so I agree with that.
You know who's going to start using it? Wisconsin.
Yeah,
you don't think Luke Fickell's going to do work in Ohio now?
Oh, yeah.
You have Luke Fickell, Marcus Freeman, and Mel Tucker are the head coaches of 3 competitors of Ohio State in the Midwest who all have very, very strong Ohio connections because they're all from Ohio and they all have Ohio State affiliations. You don't think Mel Tucker, Marcus Freeman, and Luke Fickell are waiting for any misstep? So they cannot fall back on the assumption of that these Ohio kids are always going to be there for them, maybe that the way they could in the past, because the game has gotten more competitive in your own backyard.
And I think rankings are an interesting thing. I was having a conversation with somebody from Ohio State about, because he was just like, who comes up with these rankings? There's a lot that goes into these rankings, which also shapes some of our narrative here. What if Mayan Williams had been the second choice from the get-go? So instead of having to wait till the Penn State game to get that, what if they had locked in? They knew they were going to try to take 2 guys in that 2020 class if they could. They've been trying to do the 2 thing for a while now. They've only done it once. But what if they had locked in on Mayan Williams in March? Because he'd have been there. I mean, he committed to Iowa State. He'd have been there. Would he still have been in the 600s with the rankings? Because a big part of the rankings is who are your offers, who you're committed to, especially with these skill position guys. Jermaine Matthews was a 3-star when he first got that Ohio State offer. He commits, and then obviously he has the big-time senior year. All of that, he's a top 50 recruit. What if he'd have said no? Or what if Ohio State what if he'd have left that day and he hadn't been a dude to that level and Ohio State still wouldn't have been ready to offer him and he'd have ended up at Cincinnati? He might be 250 right now just because that's just how this works out a little bit. So there's the rankings, they matter with context, especially for guys who aren't just like universal 5-stars that everybody thinks so. Because even if the composite rankings might have you in one place, but then you'll look at all the individual sites, and Jermaine Matthews is like 141 one place, he's like 27 another place, so they're kind of all over the place in those situations. So we always have to keep that in mind, and I think we have to do that even better going forward because of situations like this. Because there's going to be some Ohio guys who do get it's called the Buckeye bump. You get the Ohio State offer. You probably get a bunch of other offers from schools of that level, or maybe the level right under that because Ohio State is now offered. And that happens all the time. You saw it with guys like Keon Grays, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Travion Henderson, Kyle McCord to an extent. So we have to always keep that in mind. But, yeah, I do. But also, yes, the whole Wisconsin is now a player. Michigan State's now a player. Notre Dame's now a player. Michigan's been a player. Penn State's now a player. Cincinnati will continue to be a player, even if they don't have Luke Fickell. That's like the smart thing they can do is go get the kid who isn't quite Ohio State level good, but he's a really good player that can put you in a situation where, you're, and especially now if they're a Power 5 program, they now have that on their back as well. So all those factors, Ohio State has to pay a little bit more attention to the kid who is ranked 178 and 222 than they did maybe for the past decade when we're Ohio State. We're only going to take the best Ohio has to offer, and then we're going to go get Chase Young, Jeff Okuda, and J.K. Dobbins.
And listen, there's always good players from Ohio who are under the radar, or underrated, or underdeveloped in high school who then go somewhere that's not Ohio State and then are good. And it's not just like name that guy who didn't go to Ohio State who then turned out to be good. I could also say, like, why did Jason Kelsey and Travis Kelsey both go from Cleveland to Cincinnati and they went right past Columbus? Like, what? I don't know the answer to that. They were lower rated recruits, like a guy like Kobe Bryant, whose his brother Christian plays at Ohio State. Luke Fickell gets him to go down to Cincinnati out of Glenville. He's a lower rated guy, but I think you have to be aware. You have to be on the lookout for some of these guys. And I think some of it's the way you think about it. And if Ryan Day and Mark Pantoni tell each of the positional coaches, okay, one of your assignments in this recruiting class is to go find a golden Ohio nugget. We want you to find a kid that you see something in him. whether it is his athleticism, he's an inch or two too short, but he's super fast and quick, whether he's a bowling ball and super strong, whether he's long and skinny and we, got to put weight on him. Whether he's got a super smart football mind and we want to develop that. But that's a task. It's not a bonus. It's not stumbling on it. It's a goal. It's a priority. And it doesn't mean we're going to take every single one of them. But if in each class of the 9 position groups, they're on a search for the golden Ohio State nugget. That's 9 kids. Now you're going to take the top kids in the class anyway, but they're really going to dig in on a guy like that. And then we want to take some of them. I guarantee we're going to take some of them, guys. So make a case for your guy. And we want to find those guys. We want to find the next Kobe Bryant, right? We want to find the next Mayan Williams and get in on them. That's just a way of thinking. That's a way of going about it. That's a rearranging your priorities. And I do think there's a way that can work and that they can never stop going after Chase Young and J.K. Dobbins and Bijan Robinson, and especially at the skill position, stuff like that. They can't stop that. But all of a sudden, if they decide, and again, what are rankings? I mean, we're not going to say that rankings. I mean, rankings still have value for sure, and their offer list does obviously matter, as you said, Stephen. But if all of a sudden they value a kid in the 500s from Ohio the same way they value a kid in the 100s nationally, right? If you're top 50 and you have an inkling of an interest in Ohio State, we're coming after you, okay? And if your parents used to live in Ohio and they got transferred for a job, we're coming after you. But anybody else, if you're not top 50 and you're national and there's no connection, like we're probably not going to go there. We're going to go hard for a kid in Ohio in the 500s with purpose. Not that recruiting class a couple years ago where they kind of had some holes on the offensive line and they scooped up a bunch of offensive linemen in the 500s. That's not purpose. That's not a plan. As long as it's your plan, I can get behind it. So I can look at an Ohio State taking a kid from Ohio. It's the exact same ranking. But the way they take him changes my view of the player and of whether their recruiting class is a success. So Ohio State, go do what you got to do. I promise on Buckeye Talk, we'll take it all into context. If your recruiting class is now 8th in the country instead of 3rd, but we can see purpose, we can see planning, we can see very little wasted effort, we can see prioritizing guys for a certain reason, we can see a developmental strategy. I'm here for it, Stephen. This has been an excellent football program. It's not like it's broken. But if this is a little bit of a turn, and I have a number I'm going to give us here in a second, if this is a little bit of a turn, at least while NIL is still like this, I really don't see a downside to it. Like, right? I mean, it's great to go have a 2017 class where you get Chase Young and Jeff Okudah and J.K. Dobbins and Baron Browning, and you get all the best players in Texas. Texas is a mess, and Larry Johnson works some magic with the DMV kid because Chase Young is the perfect Larry Johnson recruit because, number one, Larry Johnson's DMV, and that's where Chase Young's from, and number two, Chase Young is a technician who wants to learn how to play the position, and Larry Johnson's a technician. So that's a little bit of lightning in a bottle. Always be on the lookout for that. But I'm here for it, Stephen. Are you? What do you think?
Even with that 2017 class, it was a low number of Ohio guys, only 6 of them, but it's still the most of any state in that recruiting class. I agree with the point. I was going to make that point. The 2020 offensive line recruiting class, that's not purpose. That's oversaturation because you're trying to correct the numbers in a room. And you can always – and that's a mindset. It looks like it's a mindset of, oh, we can always just go pull some Ohio guys if we need to get our numbers right. And then you got your numbers right, but you don't actually have playable guys because only one of those guys is hitting. And we're actually not sure if he's a complete hit because he still hasn't started yet in Josh Pryor, who I'm including in this because he said Ohio but also Midwest. That all kind of correlates because Ohio has been the team of the Midwest for the past 20-plus years at this point. I like this plan because I'm trying to figure out how to say this here. What it does is going back to that word over-evaluation. you're no longer over evaluating, because when I think of over evaluating, it's like, oh, we've seen this kid already. What more do you want me to see from him? I'm going to go look at this guy. That's what ends up happening a lot of times, because this kid. I'm glad he brought up the 40 time point, because if a kid is slow the first time you see him, he's probably still slow to you the third, fourth, fifth time you see him, and you probably look at him a little bit differently. Now, if you're going in with that purpose of go find me that Ohio kid that isn't really on anybody's radar at all, and right now he's in the 500s, but you see something in him, and maybe he ends up climbing up the rankings because of it, or maybe he doesn't climb up the rankings. It's sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But go find me that kid. It allows you to use that over evaluation for a purpose. They spend a lot of their time traveling around to different high schools, building relationships with high school coaches, doing the recruiting, walking the beat for assistant coaches, as a better way to say it. But now when these kids do come to 3, 4, 5 camps in a row in the summer, and they're doing that for 2 or 3 summers in a row, now you know what you're looking for. You're looking for a special trait, even if everything else is still kind of ugly right now. So it doesn't feel like these Ohio kids have wasted their time either when they come to these camps, because there's a chance that you might be that Jermaine Matthews. There's a chance that you might be that Jair Brown or that Mayan Williams next time around. But if every cycle, let's just outside of wide receiver, because Brian Hartline can go pick whoever he wants. So I'll take the linebacker. You go chase the Baron Brownings of the world, and maybe you get a Baron Browning. But for every Baron Browning, there's a Tommy Eichenberg. I mean, that seems like a quality situation to me, because Baron Browning was quality but never maximized. Tommy Eichenberg has very much outplayed his expectations here. So that's a win-win in my book.
Yeah, I think it can. I think it can really work. I just really think it can work. Again, you don't want to cherry pick necessarily every example of a guy that they didn't take that turned out to be good, but I will. I'm just looking I'm just trying to go through and find guys who maybe could fit. And I don't know the ins and outs. Let's look at a guy like Darian Kennard, who was the number 11 overall player in Ohio in the class of 2018, and of St. Ignatius, was the number 314 overall player, the number 22 overall offensive tackle. He goes to Kentucky. He's a multi-year starter at Kentucky, and he's a 5th-round draft pick in the NFL. And he went to Kentucky instead of Ohio State, right? And so what is the St. Ignatius kid? And he's an offensive tackle? And, I think that the 2017 recruiting class for Ohio State, and we could probably do a greater analysis of this, the 2017 class for Ohio State, I think, is almost the perfect class for Ohio State, and it's a great example of what you can do successfully when you go national with Chase Young and Jeff Okudah and J.K. Dobbins and Wyatt Davis and an Ohio kid like Josh Myers, and they wind up fueling that 2019 team that's undefeated in the regular season and makes the playoff. 2018, right behind it, I think is an example of how you can go national and it not work, because it just has not been super impactful. And they both were ranked number 2 in the country, and they're both very heavy national. The 17 class, 6 Ohio kids out of 21. The 18 class, 5 Ohio kids out of 26. And you look at the most impactful kids from the 18 class: Nicholas Petit-Frere, good solid player; Teron Vincent, good solid player; Tyreek Smith from Ohio, right? Jeremy Ruckert, solid. Tommy Togiai, solid. Matthew Jones, Cam Brown. But the best player in that class was Chris Olave, and we all know the Chris Olave story. A lot of the big-time dudes at the top didn't end up making a major impact here. And along the way, I think we theorized, well, were they blocked by the 17 guys? But then a lot of those 18 guys, when they got opportunities, it didn't really happen. And that, I think, is a cautionary tale. A little bit, only 5 out of 26. That is not a lot of Ohio. And so let's even when it works, and that's it worked. They got the number 2 class in the country, Steve, and they went for national guys and got them, but it doesn't guarantee anything. And again, if Nathan were here, he would say, well, recruiting ranking, we get it. But they matter. So I'm here for this, and here's the other reason why. And I've referenced this before, that I do think in a lot of ways, to me, The roster for 2014 Ohio State, that national championship team, to me is almost like the perfect Ohio State roster because it was a blending of Jim Tressel and Urban Meyer. It was Urban Meyer national guys on top of an Ohio core that was left here by Jim Tressel. So I looked at the 2014 team, the 2019 team that we just referenced, Ryan Day's first year, but it's the team left him by Urban Meyer that makes the playoff, and then the 2022 team. And I looked at PFF and the number of snaps on both sides of the ball, the top 16 players by snaps on both sides of the ball. So the top 32 guys who contributed, how many were from Ohio? The 2014 national championship team, do you want to guess, Stephen, of the 32 guys I counted, how many were from Ohio?
18.
19. Very good guess. 19 of 32. 2019 team, do you want to guess how many of the 32 were from Ohio?
There were probably more players with Ohio ties than actual Ohio players. I'd say like 6.
8. 8 of 32. And 2022, how many were there?
I mean, can we actually count Maya Williams if he only played like 3 snaps? I'd say 4.
The 2020, well, no, my 2022 team, Maya Williams played. I mean, we're not talking about just like the playoff game. We're talking about the whole season. Number of snaps the whole season.
Yeah, I'll say 7.
9. So we go from 19. The last time Ohio State won a national championship, 19 of their top 32 guys are from Ohio. 2019, 8. 2022, 9. So the reason I do that is to remind people. Now, listen, what you can't be is beholden to Ohio at all costs. Hey, no matter what, doesn't matter what the talent actually is, half our class is going to be Ohio. You can't do that. But you can prioritize, you can be proactive, you can look, you can search, you can dig out guys, you can give maybe benefit of the doubt, you can realize when you're over-evaluating, you can establish relationships, you cannot slow play, you can do all these things that I think maybe they have not done in recent years. Why? Not because they're bad at recruiting, because they were going after the very best kids in the country almost at all costs. As we say, always looking for Ohio ties. And I don't want to say ignoring kids in their backyard, because that's not fair either, but not prioritizing. I think there's a way you can do it, and I think there's a way you can win with it. Now, if there's a dip in Ohio, okay, now you go a little bit more. But when it's pretty good, you look at the 2014 team, the offensive line, the whole offensive line's Ohio guys.
Yep.
Billy Price, Tyler Decker, Justin Boren, Darrell Baldwin, Pat Elflein. Those are the 5 guys who played the most snaps of the entire offense. At your starting offensive line, it's all Ohio. It's all Ohio. So on some level, and even as much as I kind of pound the table at times for more Ohio guys, I can also be dismissive of it. Justin Fry's first recruiting class, I was like, well, he got the Ohio guys, of course. But it's like, well, you get Austin Cerebell, Josh Padilla, and Luke Montgomery. What if they're all starting for you 2 years from now? It's like, okay, you built something from Ohio out. I do think supplementing skill is always going to be something you're going to have to do. Ezekiel Elliott, not from Ohio. JT Barrett, a national guy. Jeff Hireman, a national guy. Michael Thomas, a national guy. Evan Spencer, a Midwest guy with Ohio ties, obviously. And then you get back to guys like Jalen Marshall, Ohio. Devin Smith, Ohio. Nick Vanette, Ohio. Cardale Jones, Ohio. Corey Smith, Ohio. Like, these are real Ohio contributors to that national championship team in 2014. And then on the defensive side of the ball, these are the guys, the 3 guys who led the defense in snaps: Tyvis Powell, Duran Grant, Josh Perry. Ohio, Ohio, Ohio. Now, guess what? Does Joey Bosa help? Yes, he does. National guy with Ohio ties. Darren Lee, Ohio. Adolphus Washington, Ohio. Michael Bennett, Ohio. Steve Miller, Ohio. You can just run through the list. You know, Tyquan Lewis, that's a nice 3-star developmental get from North Carolina. You still want to do stuff like that. Von Bell and Raekwon McMillan are big national guys there, but they're crucial. I don't want to say cherries on top. It's like whipped cream. It's like it's really important toppings, but your ice cream scoops are your Ohio guys. So it's just a reminder, Stephen. It's a reminder that you can win with more Ohio players than they have right now. So in a world where Mark Pantoni last Wednesday is saying, we think we have to go more Ohio because of NIL. We're going to not over-evaluate. We're going to be committed to development. And maybe we're going to not slow play some of these guys, and we're going to go get a few more of them each year. I am just saying this, Stephen, as vociferously as I am, because I don't want any listeners to Buckeye Talk to think that means Ohio State's giving up. That means that Ohio State is accepting a lower standard for football success, because I think 2014 shows you that it absolutely isn't accepting any lower level of success. And now there are ways in which your program, I think, can be stronger, can be more sustainable, can have and perhaps be slightly more prepared on the last Saturday in November. I think there can be good things about this. And the way Pantone talked about it, they are adjusting to current realities, but they are not surrendering. They are attacking in a new way, and I think it can work for them.
And I think, especially with that 2014, I think that's a great example, because all those Ohio guys you listed, that's a variety of different type of Ohio guys. Adolphus Washington, Jalen Marshall were 5-star recruits. So, at the time of their commitments, you're probably like, yeah, you probably should get those guys. Darren Lee was not a 5-star recruit. Tyvis Powell, some of these guys were just they're the type of player Ohio State has gotten away from getting on a consistent, but the player where you had that doesn't show off necessarily your recruiting powers in the sense of building a relationship and landing a guy that makes us all go, boom, wow, look at this guy they pulled off, but more of the evaluator as an assistant goes. That's just as important as, can you evaluate talent and have an eye for something that the rest of the country just isn't seeing yet? It was a good mixture of those things. That mixture has gone away, because you talked about that 2018 class. They got 4 of the top 5 players in Ohio, and obviously they missed out on Jackson Carman, but they got the other 4. And Tyreek Smith's the only one of those 4 who ended up finishing his career at Ohio State. You know, Jalen Gill ended up at Boston College. Blue Smith ended up at Cincinnati. Dallas Gann ended up at Toledo. So there's a balance here. It's fine to go get the Tyreek Smiths of the world, but even those guys, if they don't pan out, they might transfer too. You got to go get the Darren Lees. You got to go get those lower level guys just as much as you got to go get the Adolphus Washingtons and the Jalen Marshalls of the world. And they haven't been doing that. So bringing those two worlds together, and I agree, it's not waving a white flag. We talk about it all the time from the on-field perspective. Ohio State is an SEC school in the Midwest playing in the Big Ten. And so there's a way they almost have to play football to get on the stage where they can actually be themselves. It's sort of the same thing here with the recruiting situation. They're an SEC school who recruits like an SEC school, but they're not in the SEC, and that's always a factor at play, because you're having to convince a player from Florida who's probably never seen snow or never seen 25-degree weathers and say, listen, we're probably going to play our most important games of the year in 25-degree weather, which you probably hate. So fine, you can convince the Brandon Innises to come do that because the wide receivers here are awesome. It's a little harder to convince the linebacker or the offensive lineman to come do that. But you know who you can convince to do that from an offensive line standpoint? The kid like Austin Saraville, or even a little bit down lower on the list, Zen Maholski, to do that, because he's already been playing it in his whole life. That's not something he has to get used to. So I think that's where your balance is. Ohio State has to constantly find ways to consistently thread that needle of being a playoff program who doesn't live in a playoff environment. And this is another way of them adapting to that in this new reality because of NIL, but then also factors that have always existed since Ohio State became one of the power programs in the country.